I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Welcome everyone who is joining us in person and virtually for this January 10th board meeting of the Manningell School District. And just want to mention that because many of you are joining us virtually, reminding everyone in the room to project your voice. I feel like I'm yelling and I'm just going to yell apparently. And those that are addressing the board, if you could move closer to this blue box in front of us, blue black box, that will help those in the virtual world be able to hear everything that's going on. And with that, anybody who is joining us can sign in for public forum. We have a spot on our agenda for you to take 3 minutes to address the board, and you can do that if you're in person by signing up over yonder by the entryway. And if you're in Zoom, you can do that via chat and let Jill, our host, know that you'd like to address the board during the public forum section of our agenda. And if anybody wants to sign in as a visitor, you're welcome to do that as well. If anybody in the virtual audience needs Spanish language interpretation services, there should have been pretty clear instructions on connecting with that. And if you have any issues, again, use chat to let us know if you're having difficulties with that. And I think that takes care of our logistics, housekeeping items. I don't have any announcements. No announcements? Okay, presentations. Let's move on to Superintendent Stuckey with board member recognition.
Yes, absolutely. I want to take this opportunity to publicly acknowledge our board members. Our directors play a very critical part in moving this district forward and providing the best services possible for our students and for our staff. It's a volunteer position with a lot of hours put in and certainly a great deal of advocacy for our children. And so with that, I would like to declare a proclamation coming from the Office of the Governor. And I'm going to try and do it with a mask on, and it's lengthy, so we'll get through it together. A proclamation from the Office of the Governor. Whereas Oregonians rely on a robust public education system to ensure a prosperous quality of life and strong economic health for Oregon, and whereas locally elected boards fulfill leadership roles and serve as an important conduit through which teachers, parents, businesses, and communities demonstrate the care, creativity, and support that lead to student achievement. And whereas public schools nurture and train diverse student populations to the best of their ability, whatever the resources, to give students the knowledge, skills, and opportunities they need to succeed. And whereas board members build the framework that makes it possible for education organizations to teach Oregon's children. And whereas the committed individuals who serve on the boards of Oregon's 197 school districts, 19 education service districts, and 17 community colleges deserve recognition and thanks for their dedication to the educational needs of the people of Oregon. Now, therefore, says Governor Kate Brown from the state of Oregon, hereby proclaims January 2022 to be School Board Recognition Month in Oregon and encourages all Oregonians to join in this observance. We are so very fortunate to have all of you advocating for our community and for our children or businesses. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Rachel. And they gave us little gifts of plants, which I'll do my best not to display my black thumb and kill it. And it's so cute. So thank you very much. The recognition and appreciation is much appreciated. Thank you. Right, do we have Alex Gishwell here for?
Well, I just sent Donna down to see if she might be in the front. So,
Well, we can
We can bring it back.
Yes.
She shows up. Okay,
I hope
perfect.
she does.
And then moving on to presentation from ZCS Architects Seismic Report. Chris Tonning is in the audience, and if you want to take it away, Rachel, do you have an introduction?
Yeah, Chris Tonning is here tonight. Our Director Reedman has shared that he's from ZCS Architects and Engineering. And he's tonight going to give you some basic information that is pulled from a nearly 400-page report. I think you will find this presentation to be extremely helpful in working through that document. And I'm going to turn it over to Chris. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you so much. Hopefully you can hear me.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Perfect. I must apologize. I was intending to be there in person, but unfortunately I had a scheduling conflict, and so you'll just have to bear with me here. Hopefully this will work out. Do I have the option to share my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, let's try that. Okay, can you guys see this?
Yes.
Perfect. So I wanted to take a few minutes before I get into the district specific kind of information. I'd like to just take a few minutes to go over some of the basics of what we do and why we do it. So this is a map that shows the seismicity in various parts of the country. You can see obviously our coast in particular, but really all our, the western part of our state is kind of a hotbed for seismic activity, and that's something that is a fairly new discovery in the sciences. This is prior to the 1960s and even the 70s. Scientists did not think, geologists did not think that there was any seismic hazard in the state of Oregon. I mean, they obviously knew that there were issues in California because they see fairly frequent earthquakes. But in Oregon and Washington, the idea was that there was no seismic issues at all. So when they built schools, and a lot of schools in Oregon were built in the 50s and 60s, when they built those, they did not have any idea that earthquakes were going to be a potential threat to those buildings. So what we're seeing now is that we're going through a lot of school buildings that are in that era. And we have to make adjustments to the structural
hacer
system
ajustes al sistema estructural
because this is obviously an issue
porque es
that
un
we're
problema
seeing
que estamos
with these
viendo
buildings.
con estos edificios.
See here.
Esperen.
So you might ask, what are we actually designing these buildings for now that we know that there's a risk? Do we try to keep them, keep the lights on after an earthquake, what's known as an operational performance level? That's not really realistic for most buildings, obviously, because they would have to be designed to a level that would be cost prohibitive. So, but at the other end, do we just want them to barely survive an earthquake and just prevent them from collapsing? And that's all. That seems to be a level that's considered by the general public to be too dangerous of a performance level. So what we typically see for schools is what's known as life safety. It's a performance level that helps kids and staff to evacuate. It lets people evacuate, and the buildings don't necessarily collapse. But the idea is that they're damaged beyond repair. So they're really not at a level where anyone can go back into the building and reoccupy that building after a seismic event. There's also a level of that's known as immediate occupancy, where really you could reoccupy the buildings. And this is something that we a lot of times see for assembly spaces, such as gymnasiums and auditoriums in some cases. The idea behind that is that the communities need a space that can be used as an emergency shelter after a seismic event. And so certain portions of the buildings, we typically try to meet this immediate occupancy. So the issue with immediate occupancy is that the building itself is reoccupiable, but there might not be power, there might not be certain other functions you know, a working kitchen, for instance, and that kind of thing. So there's still some work that needs to be done to make it operational after an earthquake, but that's a lot more feasible than what we typically see for, you know, obviously if there's major damage. So I wanted to just briefly look at the two things that we're looking at. One is, you know, preventing structural damage. This is obviously a building that it cannot be reoccupied, cannot be reused. And that's our primary goal with when we do a seismic retrofit, is to prevent this. The other thing that we look at is what we call non-structural damage. And so in this case, the building, the structural system and the building itself might stand, but you have a lot of damage to non-structural things such as ceilings, furniture, various equipment. And so those things are something that we also want to address, because this, even though the building is still standing in this case, it poses a major hazard to the occupants if things are falling down, and that can cause loss of life and serious injury. So we definitely want to make sure that we're addressing non-structural damage as well as much as we can. And I just want to give a quick primer on what these earthquake forces are and what they do to our buildings. So essentially what an earthquake, the type of loading and type of force that you see from that is what we call inertial forces. So really what happens is that the ground moves, and then the building and the building mass tries to catch up with the moving ground below it. And that causes forces to be applied, like you can kind of see here, on the roof structure. This is what we'd call a diaphragm. And so that's the first thing that we need to look at, is can the diaphragm transfer that force? And then we look at how that force translates to the walls and connects to the walls, because the walls are really critical. The walls are what brings those forces down to the ground. And so we looked at two types of scenarios. One is the in-plane forces. So forces that are along the length of the wall, and making sure that those walls are strong enough, stiff enough to be able to take that loading down to the ground. The other thing we have to look at is what's called out-of-plane forces. So that's having, you know, the walls themselves are spanning from the foundation up to the roof. And we need to make sure that those don't crumble away, because we want to make sure that those walls can deliver that force from the wall itself up into that roof system. That's just kind of a quick primer on what earthquakes are, what they do, and why we need to do this. Because as you might know, in your district, you have facilities that span quite a large range. Some from early 1900s, specifically looking at the old elementary school gym. And then you have various buildings that were built at different times, including, you know, the new, you probably still call it the new school. It was built in the 90s. And so you might see you might say that school is probably fine, because that's so new. The problem when we look at building codes and how they've changed over time is that there have been major developments up until the 1990s, because there were major earthquakes that happened in the 1990s that really set the bar for some of the seismic requirements that we now need to follow. So a school like St. Mary's is in pretty good shape, because it is fairly new, but there are some things there too that we'd want to address. So I'll get into those here next. So the goals of the assessment is really to go through a certain document that outlines what we need to look at and what kind of seismic hazards different types of structures have and different kind of structural systems. And then we develop recommendations on how to fix those issues. And then we help with planning on the budgetary side, because that's obviously the tricky part is finding money for this. And then we help the district prioritize improvements through something called the SRGP, which is a state program that helps with funding of seismic retrofits specifically. And also we'll help if there are any plans for doing bond work. It's easy in many cases to include that with some other stuff that's being done, because a lot of times what ends up happening is you might have some roofing replacement on the building. Well, if you're replacing the roof, that's a good opportunity to take care of some of the issues that I just mentioned about roofs and the strength of the roof and connection to the walls. That's something that can very easily be implemented as part of a project like that. So this is kind of the summary, the really, really short summary of what we found in this district. As you can see, the middle school is really what we would consider the highest hazard level, hazard severity. And the other school buildings are what we'd call moderate. So in case you're wondering what would constitute a low severity level, that would be a school that was built after 2000, essentially. If it was newer than that, we would say that those are low throughout. And then even in this case, when we say, for instance, St. Mary's is moderate, that's really the worst portion of St. Mary's is a moderate. There are certain parts of St. Mary's, for instance, that are low hazard. And the same applies to the middle school, for instance, where there are certain portions of the middle school that have already received seismic retrofits. And so those portions are good, but then there are other ones that are what we'd consider high severity. And so this is a summary of the cost that we're estimating for to rehabilitate each campus in your district. So St. Mary's is roughly 2.6 million. The old gym could take about $1 million to seismically retrofit. The middle school would be a little over 5 million, and the high school would be closer to 6 million. So the question then becomes, what do you prioritize and how do you get funding for this? And so what we would suggest for something like this is what I just referenced as the SRGP program, the Seismic Retrofit Grant Program, that's through the Business Development Department at the state. And they award these grants that have a cap, a limit of 2.5 million for each application. And that lets you retrofit up to $2.5 million worth of building, essentially. So in this case, what we would suggest, I don't know, let me see if there's next steps. Yeah, so the next steps here is to convert this report into applications. And we already started that process, and that's underway. And so what we would recommend is, I guess going back to this slide, what we would recommend, or maybe actually going back to this slide. So since the middle school is high, what we would recommend for the school board is to complete 2 applications for this campus. And like I said, each application would be 2.5 million. So we would apply for $5 million total. And it's not really clear, but actually when it ends up, basically what that ends up doing is it takes care of pretty much all the seismic problems at the middle school. And then you could basically say that the middle school would fall down to a low hazard level. And then we would recommend going after some of these other schools and getting additional grants for those. For instance, the St. Mary's we could take care of with one grant. The high school would probably be 3 separate grants that we would need to apply for to completely do that. And so essentially what we recommend is just going, kind of doing baby steps and chipping away at it, unless you guys go after a bond that could cover some more of these costs, then you'd basically be able to take care of this quicker potentially, because this is a process that could take a while. Normally a district would only get 1 application awarded at each round, but there's a round every single year. And so there's a chance that you can get two, you basically could potentially get 1 every single year. And so in the span of 6, 7, 8 years, we could be able to take care of all the buildings in the district. So that was kind of my quick overview of the report and the district needs in terms of the seismic deficiencies that we've seen. Is there any questions?
Chris, this is Sherry Reedman. I just have a clarification. I think I know the answer, but these grants, they're not matching grants. They're just grants, right?
Yep, they're not matching grants. So if you apply for 2.5 million, they will be providing that. You don't have to bring anything out of pocket. And the nice thing about so this evaluation that we put together was actually funded through a separate program with the Department of Education. They have a technical assistance program that pays for the seismic assessment. So the seismic assessment and these two applications that we're putting together is funded by the Department of Education. So the district can basically get through this process without spending any of their own money.
Thank you. Yeah. Any other board members have questions for Chris?
I do. Chris, what is the success rate of the application? Like, if you apply for it, you're more than likely to get it, or do you know the answer to that question?
That's a good question. So we submit quite a few applications. They award, typically for schools, they award roughly 25 grants each year. And it used to be that almost everyone that applied got at least one. But because this is a program that's been going on for 10 or 12 years, and it's gotten more competitive. I'll be honest with you about that. It's gotten more competitive. So your chances of getting one, you're definitely not guaranteed getting one. The things that really work in your favor is that one of the applications that we're suggesting is for this gym that you see in this picture, the middle school gym. And the state program really likes doing gymnasiums because, like I mentioned earlier, those can be considered emergency shelters. And so they're designed to a higher performance level. And the state really wants the communities to have that type of facility. So by going after one of these, that's preferred for that's one of the things that the state prefers. So that helps you out. I don't think the district's gotten one of these grants before, so that's another factor that plays in. And then there's other political factors in terms of which part of the state, how many in this particular county has gotten awards in the past, and we also do a benefit cost analysis as part of the application round, which they're basically looking at what is the benefit of doing this building in terms of the occupancy. They look at how many students are at this school and how and a lot of different factors. So I think you have a pretty good shot. I think like I said, we're preparing 2 applications. You probably won't get both funded, but at least then you have 2. And then another nice thing is if you don't get one of them or either of them awarded, they roll over to the next year. So then the next round they would be automatically resubmitted.
Thank you. Good question, Andy. Any other questions? Thank you, Chris. That was very informative and helpful. Appreciate it.
Good. Yeah, it was my pleasure.
And is Alex Geschwell in the virtual audience?
I have one iPhone user. I don't have a name assigned to it, but other than that, I don't see her.
Okay. All right. We'll keep moving on to approve the agenda. So I would build a motion to approve the agenda for this evening.
I make a motion to approve tonight's agenda as is.
Seconded. Been moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Passes unanimously. Consent items, and it's reflected in our packet, and there were some changes since the initial posting on Friday, and the changes reflected are current, so we don't need to amend it. Does anybody have any items in the consent agenda that they want to have considered to be taken out? And if not, I would build a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
I move that we approve the consent agenda as presented.
A second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Passes unanimously. Reports. So I'm not seeing, unless we have some in the virtual audience, 6-1 licensed and classified representative reports. Okay, administrator reports. Who, I know Mrs. Winslow is not joining us tonight, so who would like to go first?
I can take the honors. I can be first here.
Go for it.
Yeah, it's been not too long since we saw you guys last, but I was able to pull some things together. First and foremost, our staff and students have done a great job continuing just to follow all the health and safety protocols, providing those gentle reminders to students when necessary, and just remind them of the importance of each of those daily practices to keep us here in school. As far as the attendance update, we're still standing at 165 students as of today. Regular attendance has dipped a little bit down to 74%. 7th and 8th graders staying pretty strong, near 80 and a little bit over 80, respectively. And 6th grade is in the 60s. And so that is an opportunity for us to be able to look at that. Overall attendance though, since returning into from winter break is 93%. So relatively happy with that and just continuing to connect with families and making sure that we're doing our due diligence to follow up on any students that aren't present with us at school. Boys basketball starts today. We have our participation numbers just keep going up. Right now, 7th grade is at 16, but it's potentially 19 students. And when you think of a middle school basketball team, 19 students on one team is quite a bit. 8th grade is standing equally strong at 13 there. So high hopes for what these teams will be able to do this season and hopefully sending off a good 8th grade class to just, bolster the high school when they get to that point. Oregon Battle of the Books, they are meeting weekly on Thursday afternoons from 3 to 3:30. Sue Geck is doing an amazing job, our librarian, helping to facilitate that. And this year it's going to be a virtual Battle of the Books. And so it will take place somewhere in April, but we have about 10 students currently participating in that. So that's really exciting. And last but not least, we've talked a little bit about outdoor school in the past, looking to get really creative with OMSI this year, but not wanting our students to miss out on those OMSI experiences. So many of them haven't been to the beach or other areas outside of Mount Angel. And so trying to look at 3 separate day trips, possibly 2 days at Silver Falls State Park, and then 1 day actually at Camp Gray, which is the Coastal Discovery Center out in Newport. And so looking to get creative with just what instruction might look like when we're doing day trips within a 3-day span. And that is it for the middle school.
Questions or comments for Vicki? Thank you.
Pass it over to Dale.
All right.
Well, I'll be relatively brief since there hasn't been much change in attendance or things like that. So I've got 3 items for you. That's it. Staff and students are preparing for finals week, which is the week of January 24th. It's a big week. We have finals on Thursday and Friday. So we have a final schedule, 4 finals on Thursday and 3 finals on Friday. So those will consist of, what we all probably kind of grew up with, some final exams, final presentations, final speeches, things like that. So anything that has to do with finality for the semester. And then we'll begin the second semester right after that. Big deal coming up, which is our accreditation visit. It happens every 5 years. There is a lot to do with accreditation. This year it's going to be done virtual. In years past, what they would do, I've been on the opposite side of accreditation. I've been part of a team that went into a school, but typically what they do is they'll interview students and staff and board members and administrators and superintendents, just to get a feel of the school. They actually have a new rubric this year. There's 30 standards that we're looking at, and each standard has 5 indicators. Simple math in my head back in the day, 30 times 5, there's 150 items that we actually have to get evidence for. And we have a little over 2 months to do it. So it's all hands on deck, and it's a lengthy process, and it's time consuming. So we're looking at different ways to be able to do that, because 1, 2, or 3 people alone just can't do that work. So we might put a team together, or it might just be staff all together doing that work. And again, it's done virtually this year, which is going to be different, even though we've been doing virtual stuff for a couple of years now, it seems like. But when you're doing a process like this, it's a little nerve-wracking. I had a conversation with Superintendent Stuckey last week, and I think she walked me off the edge a little bit, so I appreciated that. And it's, while we're just in the second week of January, we're already preparing for forecasting for next year. There's lots of things that go into play when you're talking about forecasting, working with Jared and his group. You know, how do we forecast with our 8th grade students? And then also how do we forecast and which courses are we going to be offering? And then once you have your forecasting done, then you start moving into the creation of a master schedule. We're hopeful that we can get into some sense of normalcy. We'll see. But we'll just keep moving ahead with that kind of work. That's all I have.
Thank you. Any questions or comments for Mr. Peterson? All right, thank you, Dale.
You're welcome.
And then Erica Gordon.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm gonna share my screen. Can you see it?
Yes.
No. Again, it's like you think we'd learn how to do this by now, right? How's that?
Good.
Awesome. All right. I actually just have a couple short slides for you to talk about House Bill 3499. So House Bill 3499 it's aimed at supporting our English learners. It is a statewide plan, and it directs the Department of Ed to develop and implement a statewide education plan for our K-12 ELs who are in our system. The way that trickles down is then that ODE has the districts develop plans and submits it to them. The main goal of House Bill 3499 is really to address the disproportionate outcomes. And it's really specific. It talks about the historical practices that lead to disproportionate outcomes for our students and looking at the educational needs so that we as districts need to examine what's culturally appropriate and the best practices, not just within our state, but across the nation. In order to do this, though, we are given additional funding for 4 years. If we are identified as having high needs for our ELs, but we're not seeing the outcomes that we should be able to see. So any activities that we propose must be based on a comprehensive needs assessment that is strategic and also tied to an improvement plan so that everything is done holistically and not in isolation. So like I just said, House Bill 3499 is not just a plan that gets to sit to the side. And I had 3 S's that came to mind as I was writing it. First, it needs to be strategic. It needs to align with other plans in the district. If we're really going to make some changes, we can't have just something that we do in a silo for our English learners. It needs to be systemic. We need to look at the whole and not just the parts. And it needs to be sustainable. It can't be person dependent, which is really hard to do in a small district, and it can't be grant dependent. So when this funding goes away in 4 years, how are we going to sustain the work that we've been doing? And so I just, what continually comes to mind is how are we building district capacity? So some big items that the grant may pay for as we look at systems and really hitting that disproportionality and the disparate outcomes would be a family engagement specialist to be reaching out to our families of our ELs and how we can be engaging them with the unique needs that they bring to the table. It could be an ELD program TOSA, which is a teacher on special assignment. And their work would be different. This is not someone to work with our EL students, but someone who would oversee the 3499 grant and facilitate all of the detailed activities to really keep this work at the forefront and make sure that we are reviewing the data and really doing the activities. And the other, maybe perhaps big ticket item would be ESOL endorsements for our secondary teachers. Again, looking at that systemic change. So the timeline that we're looking at right now is that we're working on a proposal for ODE to review. We need to have it submitted come January, and then hopefully ODE will have the revision feedback to us come, hopefully in a few weeks after the submission, so that by the beginning of March, our budget would be totally complete. Timeline is definitely off on all of this, but they are letting us use essentially the first year's grant money that if we don't use it, it can roll over into next year. So with that.
Thank you, Erica. Any questions or comments from the board on this one?
Erica, I just have a clarifying question. When it says the big items the grant may pay for, it says the ESOL endorsement for secondary teachers. Why do they specifically single out like the secondary teachers and not primary teachers in there as well?
Sure. Well, a couple of reasons. First of all, our data shows that our highest need is at secondary level as far as making progress in English learners. So it's really more about the comprehensive progress and the information that's come out. We've actually been working on this since April as far as just reviewing data and reporting back to the state. And when we look at who in our district has ESOL endorsements and who doesn't, that's where the need is.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
Other questions? Thank you, Erica.
Yeah.
And then before we move on to the budget stuff, just a reminder to those in the audience that after the budget report and the superintendent report, that's when public forum happens. So if you want to address the board, now's your chance to sign up through chat and let us know. Okay, moving on.
Okay. Our business manager, Christy Breckenreed, is not here this evening, but she wanted to make sure that when you looked at the financial summary, that a couple of things to keep in mind. One, the total revenue for the month looks low because we transferred a large portion of our tax revenue to our bond account to pay the bond payment, and also wanted all of you to know that our bond payments are running through 2029. So that is one thing to keep in mind. Also on the first page, if you go down to under federal sources, line item 4500 restricted, we're projecting to use a little less than $400,000 of the ESSER funds to support the general fund. That leaves about $500,000, which is earmarked for nursing services, Stride K-12 and summer school. Next month, Christy will average out the nursing services and Stride K-12 to add to the expenses. And as I had reported earlier in the fall, we're likely to end up with about $250,000, hopefully, to use for summer programming for the next 2 years. And then the last thing that Christy wanted everyone to keep in mind was that expenses are at 89% of goal right now for the month. That means that our controllable expenses are trending well, but we want to really keep an eye on that to make sure that we continue with that good trend.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you for no questions, probably. And superintendent report.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Chair Reedman. Let me just pull that up. So the superintendent's report this evening begins with enrollment. We had no requests to transfer out nor to come in to our district between December and today. We have added one more student to Stride K-12 for a total of 11. And I'm still working on an outreach project specifically for homeschool families, some outreach to them through a special card that I'll be mailing out. You may be aware now that we have some new guidance that's came out on December 29th regarding COVID-19. The Oregon Health Authority updated their investigative guidelines to align with the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and what came out on December 27th from the CDC regarding general population isolation and quarantine. This is huge positive news for our school district. We have been able to confirm with the Marion County Health Department that they are in fact adopting these guidelines, which has not always been the case. That made the fall pretty bumpy because we had the county that was taking over certain guidelines that the CDC said were fine, but our county said no. So in this instance, we're finally in some alignment. The clarity is extremely helpful. So these are the CDC guidelines that came out. If you test positive for COVID-19, you are required to isolate. Nothing changes there. Regardless of your vaccination status, everyone stays home for 5 days. If you have no symptoms or your symptoms are resolving after 5 days, you can leave your house. And you need to continue to wear a mask around others for an additional 5 days. And if you have a fever, continue to stay home until that resolves. For quarantine, if you were exposed to someone with COVID-19 and you have been boosted, and this is new language, you've completed the primary series of Pfizer or Moderna within the last 6 months, or completed the primary series of J&J vaccine within the last 2 months, then if you've been exposed, you must wear a mask around others for 10 days, test on day 5. But if you develop symptoms, then you get a test and stay home. This is great to have a shortened quarantine period for our staff and our students. If you were exposed to someone with COVID-19 for quarantine and you completed Pfizer and Moderna and you are not boosted, or you completed the primary series of J&J and are not boosted, or you are unvaccinated, you must stay home for 5 days. After that, continue to wear a mask around others for 5 additional days. If you can't quarantine, you must wear a mask for 10 days. Test on day 5 if possible. And if you develop symptoms, get a test and stay home. Now, all of this is well and good, but we have this unknown. And this is what came out in the memo last week from the Department of Education and our Director of Public Instruction, Cole Gill. The Russell Resiliency Framework and the Planning for COVID-19 Scenarios in Schools and the Oregon Health Authority's school testing guidance are all completely out of alignment with what the CDC guidance says and what OHA has adopted. So we're in an awkward holding pattern for a couple of days until all of these publications can be updated. What we have chosen to do locally is to grandfather in what we've been doing until we get new guidance. So this is where the boosters don't come into play yet, but by the time that we get that information, it may. Are there any questions on that?
I appreciate the clarity of your presentation. It's helpful.
Thank you. The last part of my presentation is just the monthly update on where we're at with our strategic planning process. The survey is closed. We have 180 responses. The community forum was complete mid-December. I made sure to have a wonderful presentation with residents out at Mount Angel Towers last week. We've completed 3 high school student voice sessions where I learned a lot, and also the students all appreciated being heard and had, even though they were very diverse, different groups, the trends were there for what they need. So that was important. The strategic plan committee is nearly formed, just a couple of holdouts, and our committee meeting is scheduled for January 18th. However, I wish to express a caveat tonight that based on what is happening right now with COVID, there is a possibility that we will not have that meeting based on the safety and health of others and have our first meeting in February. So that's in a holding pattern right now as well. It is very difficult to be able to do the strategic planning work virtually. So that's what makes it, that's the challenge. And then finally, the committee agenda for January 18th or the next month, if we need to push, is to really take a closer look at the stakeholder feedback from the survey and have our committee orient to what it was exactly that we were looking for, how we're going to use that information, sort the comments, which I would gauge to be about 1,000 comments that need to be sorted when you extrapolate everything from the survey and identify common themes. And then we want to begin to explore what is our purpose as a district and what did we learn from the survey that actually feeds into that so that we don't have to start at ground zero. What do our community members expect of a Mount Angel School District graduate? And the small group work again is what we learned from our stakeholders through that survey process. Questions?
You don't have to answer right now. I know it's been a long day. But at some point, like you mentioned that you had different groups of high school students, but their trends were kind of the same, that they're kind of voicing to you. At some point, would you be willing to share kind of what they had to say?
Absolutely. I would say the two, I'm ready to share that
okay.
tonight. The two major things that came up in all three groups were, one, mental health is a big concern. And again, the groups were very diverse from each other, but mental health was right there. The other thing was they want more electives. They want art back. They want music back. So those are the two most common.
And I would comment that Andy and I were at the community forum meeting in December, and we heard those things from community members as well.
Other questions I can entertain?
Okay, thank you. Very good. All right, any board member reports? I don't have anything. Okay, moving on to public forum. Jill, do we have anybody signed up? No. All right. Going once. I'm going to pause for 15 seconds.
Sure, I might as well sign up.
Dan, yeah, are you going to sign up?
I can sign up. Where do I sign up at?
Yeah. Name and yeah, and then you can have 3 minutes.
I hope I won't take that long.
Thank you. And if you want to pull a chair up or stand, just so you're kind of close to the box there, that'd be great.
Can you hear me, Chair?
Yes.
Good. Anyway, Madam Chairman, members of the board, my name is Daniel Crow. I used to sit on, I don't know which one of you is position 1, but I used to sit wherever that was at. I've been out of the state for the last couple of years, but I'm back now in Mount Angel. And on the 11th of November, I was up at the Korean War Memorial and met with a National Guard recruiter named Staff Sergeant Charles. And so I had communicated with Staff Sergeant Charles, and I had spoken with Member Brendan about some stickiness that the recruiter perceived in getting into the school district. And I didn't quite understand what the specifics of it were. And so I talked to Staff Sergeant Charles. He wasn't available to come to the meeting tonight. And so I'm going to touch base with him about when the February meeting is, so he can come in just so that he can get a face to a name with particularly with you, Madam Superintendent. So I just wanted to let the board know that we're trying to work through, and I'm trying to facilitate that process of working through so we can make sure that our recruiters are able to get into the district and do what they need to do. And as I understand it, the feedback I think I got from Mark already was that we're having recruiters come in already. So the issue of whatever the stickiness is probably, it could very well be from the side of the recruiters as well. But I at least wanted to give you all a heads up that we're working to try to identify that.
Wonderful.
So
That it?
that's it.
All right, you didn't even.
Less than 3 minutes.
And it's nice to hear your voice and see your face again, Dan.
Well,
Thank you.
At least as much of it as you can see.
Right, has anybody else signed up still? Okay, wonderful. Action items, board vacancy. So we are all aware that we lost our board member, John, and we need to officially declare that we have a vacancy on our board, and the language is in our blue paperwork. So if someone wants to make that motion,
I move to declare a school board vacancy for position 1.
Second.
and it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor? Aye. Okay, it's unanimous. So we officially have a board vacancy, and that's going to be communicated to the elections division, I would guess. That's probably how that works. And what happens is the board can now choose how to fill that vacancy. And so that's our discussion item, the first one. And just a little bit of, I guess, logistical information on that. So I'm assuming we're going to end up with a successful process to appoint a new board member for John, and used to be Dan's position on our board. And then school board elections happen in odd years. So in May of 23, whoever is in that position can submit to run for re-election or not. So that's when their position will be up for election. So whoever we appoint will serve in that role through June of 23. Just, yeah, that's my understanding. So we get to decide what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. Rachel and I had a quick conversation in planning, and so we need to post it. Now that the board vacancy has been declared, that will be stated online. And we can make the process and the timing whatever we'd like. And so a thought would be to post it, ask people to submit an application of interest that would come to us, and have it ready for our next board meeting in February. And as long as we would have enough interest, maybe at that meeting, we can interview people, or we could actually schedule a separate work session that is intended for us to interview interested parties. So we can handle that piece how we would like. You know, there's pros and cons, I think, to handling it both ways. And then we make, like, we would have, somebody would make a motion to appoint a specific person, or we'd have a number of people, and then we'd vote, and whoever gets the majority of the votes is who is appointed. And then my thought is we would swear that person in March, would be my guess.
Doesn't the policy says once
Or do
you
we-
vote, it's automatic?
Is it
They
automatic?
sit at the
Is that
meeting.
what the policy
Yeah, I
says?
think
Okay.
so.
That's what happened when
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what happened with
Donna
you.
Hughes,
So it happens.
yeah,
that
I
way.
mean,
So.
they approved it.
Once we approved it,
Yeah,
we
and
become
that's, I
official at
remember that,
moment.
yeah. So it's kind of a quick process. Once then they would move into the chair and be part of our board, right?
Yep.
So kind of our decision, I think, is getting agreement that we want to post it now, start accepting applications of interest, review them, and have it be an agenda item at our February meeting, or schedule a work session separate from our regular board meeting. I mean,
I think during the regular session is fine. That's how Teresa and I did it. It worked.
yeah,
It was very
It was-
simple.
It was simple.
Yeah.
Quick.
and depending on how many we have, you know,
And that could
we
be,
can choose to
yeah.
switch gears if
if we get.
have a
25
lot of
applicants.
Yeah,
interest.
true.
If we have many applications
It
and we're
might take
reviewing
longer.
them in our board meeting in February, we can always make the decision to schedule
Work
a special
Yeah.
work session or board meeting. It would probably be a board meeting or a work session, whatever we call it, to question and.
Yeah.
Because during that meeting, then we could maybe decide during that meeting or decide in March. Vote on it at our March meeting. So we've got some flexibility in how we move ahead. Does that make sense? Hopefully I'm not confusing it too much, but so we want to post it, right?
Yes.
And then see where we're at. And I think having it close the week because on this, what Jill provided to us is that the application deadline would be a week before our next board meeting.
Yeah.
And that would give us time to get it ahead of time, review them. And then it would be on the agenda for our February 14th board meeting. We can interview, let people know that they will be facing the board and we'll be questioning them, and then we can vote that night, or if we decide that we want a special extra meeting for further consideration, we can do that too. And then fill that vacancy. But
Yeah, I like that.
Sounds great.
That sounds good.
so do we need a formal motion to approve that process? Or is it, I mean, I think if we're all agreeing
My understanding was the only motion that was needed was to
to declare the
vacancy.
vacancy, yeah. So that's how we'll move forward. Okay, and so everybody who's listening, if you're interested in being a part of our school board, you'll have the next couple weeks to get your application in. And Jill was kind enough to print off some questions that are possibilities for us. And so as we're thinking about what we want to ask those that, you know, are going to be brave enough to submit their applications and be questioned, you know, in an open board meeting. Is there anything in particular that we think, any themes that we want to ask about, or anything in particular we could, what do we think about that? How do we want to handle which questions to ask? It could be that we each just choose one from the list of 11 that Jill provided to us, or kind of a personal preference type of thing.
Either way.
So maybe if we want, maybe how about each board member give it some thought and come up with a question they'd like to ask, and it can be, and I would say provide those to me ahead of time, just so if there's redundancy, I can make sure that everyone has, or maybe it's okay just to ask 3 questions. If 2 of us are wanting to ask the same question, that type of thing. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah, so give that some thought and think about a question that you would like to ask those that declare their interest in serving with us. What are we missing in this discussion?
I think I got it covered.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jill and Rachel, since you guys are gonna be doing it, do we miss anything? We're good? Okay, no, awesome. So spread the word, those of us that are listening. Okay, reviewing board goals. So this is something that we haven't been great about as a board, to be honest. And I would say that for me, the board we've handled it a number of different ways since I've been on the board. We've wanted to support the superintendent with their goals. And we've been pretty intentional about that. And we've piggybacked on the strategic plan of the district really for the last couple of years. And so a thought is, do we want to start having the conversation? I suggest we start having the conversation about establishing some specific board goals that are in alignment with our superintendent, and will be in alignment with what our strategic plan looks like when it's updated. And so timing of all this, I don't think we need to do this tonight. I would recommend that we give it some thought, and when we're ready, we have a separate work session on this, because I think to do it well, it needs our brainstorming and idea sharing. And
Undivided attention.
yeah, so I would recommend that we have a separate work session to establish our board goals. And I'm wondering what you guys are thinking about the timing of that. If you want that to happen, you know, kind of parallel to the strategic planning as we're hearing what we're hearing from the community, or if we want to do it earlier to kind of influence that strategic planning process, or if we want to kind of go back and wait till like April, May, once we have a better idea of what we're hearing from the community on what they're wanting?
I wouldn't feel comfortable doing it before.
Yeah.
That's what I was.
Because
that's-
we're here for the community, right? So we need to be either in sync with the strategic planning or a little behind
A
them.
little behind.
Yeah, and it could be that we
I would
wait
agree.
till next fiscal year as well. Once we've adopted the strategic plan, then we do the board goals. So we don't, there's no
Yeah,
hard and fast rule on timing.
definitely want the community input.
Yeah. So what I would say is let's kind of just have it in the back of our minds, and we'll table this until maybe when Rachel and I are planning the agendas, maybe bring it back in May, and refresh the thinking, and then start planning how to identify and adopt board goals for the next fiscal year. I agree. I think doing it at this time seems awkward and
Yeah.
not as helpful or useful. And I mean, one thing that came to mind right away for me was enrollment. We definitely, all of us know that we want to keep our eye on enrollment, and that doesn't need to be stated as a specific board goal now for everyone to know that that's, of importance to all of us. But yeah, so things like that. Good. Any other questions or comments on board goals? Okay, so we'll bring it back in May as a discussion item to start gaining traction at that time. All right, 9.3, procurement cards. Well, that's exciting.
Yes, for sure. So in your packets, you will find policy DJFA, as well as what has been in place and what is proposed. I'm recommending tonight some updates in support of the business office and their current practices. So what you will see in red is a proposed limit increase from $750 purchasing to $1,500. Also, some semantics acknowledging that we use invoices, purchase order invoices and not slips. Remove the language regarding superintendent pre-approval because purchases of any amount can be made after an approval is purchased is in place. Increasing gratuity to 20% and making sure that we have a printed receipt that clarifies that or provides evidence of that. Also, this proposal provides further clarity regarding a staff's inability to earn or use travel rewards when they use a district procurement card. So those are the changes that are being proposed that I recommend for your consideration.
I see no.
Yeah. So
I don't have issues.
clear.
Nice.
And then Andy, on to the student representative update.
Yes, so in your packet right there, you have student representative to the board, kind of the what's kind of expected of them, the eligibility, how we're going to select, and then the responsibilities of that representative. And so, as I mentioned in my email, I seek out guidance from other school districts that have done this in the past, and Tigard Walton in the presentation that I attended earlier this summer, their board put on this presentation, so I reached out to him. And they've done it for 10 years. At one point, they had the ASB leadership is kind of appointed through that, but then they decided to open it up to all students so that there'd be more opportunity for kids to access it. They have it open to juniors and seniors. So your sophomores and juniors would be applying for the position. So I thought approaching, Dale or the sophomore and junior class advisors, like who do you think would be good people to want to run for this? Their application will be due May 1st. And so I figured getting them to the school to hand out that first week right after spring break to get them a month to fill out the application. And then it would be 2 board members would review the applications and come in and interviewing the applicants, as well as Superintendent Stuckey, if she would like to be a part of the process as well. And then as a part of the application, they have to write down 2 staff members from the high school reference names, and we would reach out to them as part of the process. On the application, there's just 3 general questions that we would ask of them to complete in their little essay, no more than 500 words. But a couple things I kind of want to get, one area in particular, I want to get feedback. Kind of like, you don't really want to reinvent the wheel. So I took a lot of what Tigard Schwartz have had and just kind of tweaked a little thing here and there to be specific to our district. If you look on the second page, responsibilities of student representative to the board. Number 1, it says attend meetings of the board. The student representative may miss up to, they had 5 board meetings. I thought that was a lot within 12. I put 3. I still kind of feel like that's kind of a lot, but knowing that potentially these people are involved in sports, right? I don't want to have that held against that too. So I want to kind of give feedback on how you feel about 3 in that area. And
Definitely
then,
better than 5.
yeah,
Yeah.
5 is almost 50%.
Yeah,
So-
and, you know, I'm wondering, summertime,
A little harder.
yeah, and so that's where, you know, 3, 4, and what's the consequence of doing this for 3? Do they explain why, and then we say, okay, keep coming?
Or I think it'd be kind of a discussion that we first
Yeah.
kind of have, say, you know, hey, we need you really committed
Yeah.
to this process. We value your feedback. We
I like
value
that. It
getting
would-
the
Yeah,
information.
it would trigger,
peers.
a reaffirmation of their commitment
Right.
and give them a way out if they're just not committed.
And then in here, it talks about, you know, if somebody needs to vacate, kind of what our on number 4, under a selection of student representatives, should the position of a student representative to the board become vacant prior to January 1st, potentially, the board may appoint a replacement who will serve until the
And
end.
should that be July
That's what-
1st? Isn't it July to June, right?
It could, but do we want to say a little bit earlier than that, though, just because if it's, you know, they're going to vacate it June 1st?
Oh, got it. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Any and all feedback would be, again, appreciated
Yeah.
with
Yeah,
this,
that
but in the first year, knowing that we don't have a past representative, then that second year, the current student representative on the board would also be a part of the interviewing committee
yeah,
of the next one.
That's really like
So that they can also kind of give feedback to the
Yeah.
people applying as well, and answer any questions that they may have in your interview.
I think this is excellent work,
Yes,
Andy. I mean,
You did a great job.
yeah. Expectations are clear, process is clear. Anybody have,
It looks very
it's
good.
really good. And so we have
It's
the,
very clear for
Yeah.
like someone of that age to
Yeah.
do it.
yeah, and we already have the policy.
Yes.
And so this doesn't need,
I think that maybe taking, I know that Tiger Walton at least had this part of the policy information there. I could kind of discuss more with you, Rachel, about that as well, but just kind of, so it's clearly stated online to kind of.
Yeah.
As well, but really opening up the conversation, you know, with those kids feeling a part of the process, you know, valuing their opinion. We might specifically reach out, what are your thoughts on there, but yeah, hopefully they find it a very valuable process and feel, as Superintendent Stuckey talked about, heard in her listening sessions with high school. So essentially that's what we want to get out of this.
I really like it. I'm impressed and I thank you because it didn't just happen. So thank you. Any other questions or-
It's a great thing.
Yeah,
Looks really good. I was really happy to see it yesterday.
yeah. And I like May 1st as because that gives us then by our May board meeting, we can, know who's interested and get an update then and have somebody
And our,
in July.
yeah, do the interviews, I'm thinking in May.
Yeah,
Yeah.
very good.
Make the announcement at June and swear them in July.
And Andy, you said that Tiger Walton does have this like directly in the policy, right?
It's part of, yeah,
Part of the policy.
I'll send you a copy of specific which one it is off the top of my head. If you
Yeah.
don't have that, but
It
I
makes
will.
sense to have it in the policy.
Nice. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Anything else on this one? Right. Okay, superintendent evaluation survey. So we're gearing up for our formal performance evaluation of our superintendent. And part of that is a survey that's going to go out. We reviewed the last survey that was done, and it's in sync with what we have documented for what our expectations are of Rachel. And so we didn't see any reason to make any changes other than the last time this survey went out, there wasn't room for comments. I don't know if you remember that, Teresa.
Yes, yes.
But we're definitely leaving room for comments in each section this time. So be prepared that you will be getting an email from Ava, right? And you'll see the deadline in the invitation, and we want you to complete that survey. And it's going to go out to not only board members, but also administrators and district office staff, those that work regularly and closely with our superintendent. So we'll have that information when we do the evaluation meeting with Rachel in February in executive session. So we'll have that information. So be on the lookout for that. Any questions or comments? Did I miss anything on what we were? All right. Okay, curriculum adoption process.
Thank you. Sure you can see that. So what I'm sharing with you this evening, I will admit, is probably much more formal than what Mount Angel School District is used to. However, I think that it's greatly important that the board understands the investment that goes into not only textbooks, but curriculum and standards and how that aligns with student learning. And for that reason, I do think it's important to have a solid formal process so that it's very clear from the get-go that we're looking at a return on investment. This is not just about purchasing textbooks. We're expecting, the board is expecting, the community is expecting a return on the investment. So when I think about that, and I think about where we're headed with English language arts, I can't think of a textbook, curriculum, and standard that is more important for the success of our students than literacy. Reading, writing, the ability to express oneself, and certainly to listen are all very critical pieces, whether college or career pathway, both are essential to have these skills. And so for that reason, like I said, you're probably going to find that this is more formal than what you are used to. Well, that's gone from my screen. Let me just, that's not, okay, that's interesting. Let me just try this again. Go, better. So what you'll see is a typical process, and you will see on the right side, the timeline is January through May into next fall with robust professional learning for staff. That's the one piece that if you don't put into place and do it well, it just falls to the wayside and sits on a shelf, which is not what we want. What I do want to bring to your attention are the things that I've highlighted here, because I think those are essential elements to a successful adoption process. When I bring together a committee, we want to be able to orient them on what the most effective research tells us about practices. We want to make sure that we are actually looking at the state standards, which the English language arts standards have been updated in the last year. Approximately 25% of the standards are new or revised. So it's critical to be looking at this information. Also looking at our previous local achievement data. For the time that we have had the curriculum textbooks that we've had, how have our kids fared? Where have the holes been? And then most certainly looking at, when we look at the material alignment process, identifying priority areas and gaps, not only in student achievement data, but also what do our staff have to tell us? Were the materials user-friendly? Did they come with digital components? Did it cover enough variety of student needs? Those are the things that we want to know in advance before we choose another curriculum, because we don't want to make the same mistakes. We want to close those gaps. And then the final thing I wanted to share with you tonight is that we will be developing our own material assessment tool that will be used based on what our needs are in Mount Angel, based on our gaps and how we close them and what's going to be the best fit for us. So rather than going through this whole process with you, I thought I could give you updates every month or two on how it's going and just give you an introduction tonight so that you would know how where we're going to start, what the focus will be, knowing again that this process will be going through May, June, and into August. So that is the presentation on the curriculum adoption process. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have about this.
What is the date where we would be expected as a board to adopt the new curriculum?
Let me share.
May 2022.
May 20.
Mhm.
I was just looking.
We want to make sure that that the board is given a position paper in advance, so you know what the rationale is for spending what is likely to be about $150,000.
Would that be part of your report in the section prior to that, the review report, summary process, learning goals, budget
Yes.
implications? That's
Yes.
basically-
That it definitely would be. And we want to make sure that there's time for the community to review the materials that are being recommended as well.
Will that give them requisite time between April and May to do that?
Any other questions?
Very thorough.
I will continue to update you in the process. I know that I can share with you that I get questions all the time. When are we starting? When are we starting? Our teachers are very excited and eager to be looking at new materials and new ways of thinking and teaching and learning for students.
Having been on different curriculum adoptions, throughout my teaching years, I really appreciate what you're doing here about that orientation, and let's, review those standards and the new ones and create what do we need, especially the part of what didn't work with our previous one. That I think that's very valuable.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you. Very, very well done. And then the last item on our agenda is strategic planning, upcoming committee work.
Right. So you have already seen this slide. I just shared it maybe a half an hour ago. What this first meeting will be, but I bring it up again because I would like to get some clarity from our directors about where they might want to participate in this process. If you happen to be someone who enjoys details to the nth degree, the first meeting might be a really good one for you, because again, we're going to be looking at almost 1,000 comments is my guess, and grouping them in small teams. And that takes a level of patience and detail work. But I wanted to just put that out there for meeting number one. I know that maybe you don't want to commit to going to every single of the 5 meetings, but you may want to rotate. So the discussion is knowing that these additional committee meetings are coming up, and also knowing that if we have to push forward because of COVID, we will add another committee meeting near the end of April. How would you like to proceed as the board of directors in representing the board?
And I feel strongly that having at least one member of the board at all of our committee meetings sends a strong message of support and engagement by the board. So I would, and we've talked about this as a board already, that we're committed to engaging in this process, and up to 2 of us can be at any given committee meeting. So here's our chance to speak up and claim some dates. You know, Andy and I participated in December. So, and 2 of us don't have to be there at every meeting, at least 1 of us. So it really just kind of depends on our preference.
So that first meeting on the 18th of January,
Yeah.
that'll be the sorting of data. I'll go to that one. I like that. That's always fun.
Okay.
All right, so
There's a lot of
Mark
data in the survey results and a big spreadsheet.
And if that gets pushed out to February,
Yeah.
then we can, yeah.
Thank you.
Bring the dates back up.
You bet.
Oh, they're on my screen. All right. And then February 10th.
I'd be glad to go to the February 10th one. What time are the meetings at?
6 to 7:30.
6 to 7.
I'm gonna hold off until either March 29th or the 12th. I start coaching my daughter's basketball team next week, and I don't know my practice schedule yet.
So
So-
I'll claim March 1st.
Okay.
And then the last 2, you know, we can talk about this at our next.
I can commit to the 29th because I know basketball will be
Okay.
over by
Yeah.
then.
And then the last one, we'll see, maybe the new board member
Yeah.
would want to attend. So we
I
have
have to look
Mark.
at track schedule. This
Yeah.
probably always makes
We
it
have
work.
Mark going to the first one, Teresa the second one, I'll be at the third one, and Andy will be at the fourth one.
Yep.
And if we decide that we want to double up, run it through Rachel. Like if you really are wanting to see all the details, you know, I'm sure Mark would welcome one of us.
Just make sure not more than 2 of us.
Yes, yes, we just have to run it through Rachel to make sure we
Yeah,
really have
yeah.
a quorum.
So that first one's on January 18th.
Mhm.
Correct. Okay.
And
And
oh, pardon me.
I was gonna say, get them in your calendars, and also the budget calendar was in our consent agenda, and if you haven't already, I suggest that you put those meetings on your calendar as well.
Again, is that only 2 of us per budget meeting?
No, we
We're all
convene
part of
as a
it.
budget committee, so it's
It's a committee.
it's
Public
all of
meeting.
us.
Okay.
We're all expected to join in the budget process, yeah. What did I interrupt you from saying?
Oh, I was just going to say, my intention is that when we come together every month, that I will do what I did tonight and tell you what's on the docket for the upcoming meeting, so that if a second person does feel intrigued by what they're seeing, then they could also look them. Okay? Thank you.
Anything else? Any questions or comments for the good of the order before we adjourn tonight? I want to thank everyone, as you know, it being Board Appreciation Month. Well done, board. And with that, meeting is adjourned.